Hi, everybody. What I'm going to do is try to explain this a little bit better so you understand it a little bit more. Oops, let me get this on. Yeah, we'll do red. Okay. All right, so we saw this in class. This is your brain spinal cord area, and off of each spinal cord area, you have different areas of the spinal cord that control movement or control organs. They do all sorts of different things. So what these are for, it shows that up here will control these specific things, and this is what it does. So it constricts your pupils, increases salivation. This is part of your parasympathetic nervous system. So whenever you think of your parasympathetic nervous system, you have to think they're working up here in the brainstem area. And when you have the sympathetic nervous system, it's actually working all along this area in your spinal cord, on your thoracic spine and your lumbar spine. So how I want you to try to understand it is sympathetic nervous system works within the spinal cord here, all right, and then the parasympathetic works here. And sympathetic means fight or flight, right? Fight or flight. And this one is rest and digest. So as you can see, rest and digest, you're actually increasing salivation, decreasing your breathing rate, your heart rate's slowing down. When they say rest and digest, we're like, okay, things are slowing down, your blood vessels are widening, but then this is increasing. So again, I suffer from panic attacks, so I can completely understand, because what happens is I have the fight or flight first. So things get kind of dry. I have no idea what my pupils look like. My heart rate increases, my breathing increases. I have no idea. That's what panic attacks are. You get this adrenaline rush, because you have to think of sympathetic, this adrenaline rush, epinephrine, which is a natural hormone in our body, starts going through. And so your heart's racing, you're feeling absolutely terrible because it stimulates more secretion of this. It's just increasing anxiety. And then as things start going through, your parasympathetic kicks in and everything starts to slow down, and all of a sudden you got to run to the bathroom. So you can see it's really a fine-oiled machine, but yet people with disorders or other things like panic attacks or anxiety, sometimes this can be malfunction, this whole area, because it happens when you're not supposed to have it happen. Oops, why isn't this erasing? Okay. All right. I mean, if I was running away or doing a race, of course my adrenaline's rushing, but I'm feeling fine with that because that's what I'm doing. I'm running. So that's to be expected for you to feel that way. But if you're just sitting there and all of a sudden you get that adrenaline rush, you can see how it could be very uncomfortable. All right, so now let's talk about each side. So let's think of your sympathetic nervous system as having your alpha and your beta. I did a lot of studying up on this afternoon, so I hope this helps understand it. So when you think sympathetic, think alpha and beta. And when you think parasympathetic, think muscarinic and nicotinic. I'm going to cross out nicotinic because we're not going to talk about that. You don't need to know that, but that's just part of the parasympathetic nervous system area. So you have alpha 1 and 2 and beta 1, 2, 3. There's also more alpha receptors and beta receptors. When you think of receptors, receptors are things that are stimulated. So if you take a alpha receptor drug or a beta receptor drug or even beta blocker, it's either stimulating these receptors to excrete more adrenaline, such as up in the alpha ones, or it's blocking the receptors, so it'll block that so that chemical won't release and therefore maybe slow down your blood pressure. Okay, so, and you have receptors everywhere in your body, basically, but it depends. So alpha 1 and 2 are in different areas than beta cells are. I don't want you to pay attention to this one because it's really just still being studied. All of our drugs are really here. There's some drugs with beta 3, but just pay attention to beta 1 and 2. When you learn about beta blockers, you're really just you need to understand which ones are dual beta 1 and 2, but you really just want to focus on the whole pathophysiology of it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get out of this picture and go to my lovely drawing that I made. This is probably the best drawing I've done of a person in my life. Here I have the brain, I have the lungs and the heart and the bladder. You saw the spinal cord on the last slide, so I'm not going to redraw that. It's going to make it way too messy to do that. So, oops, let me get rid of that. Okay. When we think alpha and beta, you have to think beta 1 and 2. Oops, let me get this on again, move this down. Okay, beta 1 and 2. This is easy to know because beta 1 is heart and beta 2 are lungs. You have 2 lungs and you have 1 heart. So beta 1 and 2. That's where those are predominantly. So you're predominantly going to see beta 1 in the heart and beta 2 in the lungs. Oops. Beta 2. What does beta 1 and 2 do? So they do different things. It depends where it is. So when I say beta 1 and 2, we're thinking receptor sites that will stimulate a response in your body. So beta 1 actually increases your heart rate. So it would constrict vessels. Whereas beta 2 relaxes your bronchioles. Oops. Relaxes your bronchioles. That's why people with beta blockers, so beta blockers slow down the heart rate, right? Because you're blocking beta is blocking. So if you're blocking, if you have a drug that works on beta 1 and beta 2, which a lot of them do, some of the newer ones are more specific to beta 1, what's it going to do? So you want to actually, beta blockers is the point to slow down the heart rate, so you cause vasodilation. So actually beta blockers block the effect of epinephrine and adrenaline, slows down the heart rate, but if you block beta 2 receptors, what's going to happen? These bronchioles might constrict. So if you have asthma, that can be a huge problem. Okay, so now let's move to alpha. So alpha receptors, let's just think alpha 1 in general. Alpha 1 receptors are in your circulatory system. So let me get red color here. So obviously you have your circulatory system in your brain, which I'm not going to draw all the red around here. But remember you have carotid arteries and you have vertebral arteries in the back, but then you have your heart here. All right, and then things come out, you have your aorta, and then it goes down to your femoral artery and iliac arteries that go down here. So your alpha receptors are in the smooth muscle of your vessels. Because remember, all these blood vessels, the lining of it here, it's muscle. So it's constricting when it needs to, and it's expanding when it needs to. So it's controlling blood pressure and various other chemicals. There's a lot of chemicals that go in this endothelial lining, it's called your endothelium, and there's so many chemical reactions. There's people that just study the lining of the arteries. Also, alpha receptors are in the bladder. So we have alpha in the bladder, and we have alpha in the blood vessels, in all of these blood vessels. So it's in the smooth muscle and that. So what does alpha do? Alpha constricts. I'm having a spelling problem. Alpha constricts. You also have alpha receptors in the brain. So that's why when sometimes you take specific medications that are working on alpha receptors, sorry if you hear my little dog barking, it can have an effect on brain stuff too, so on brain activity. So for example, let's just say someone takes an alpha agonist. So if you have an alpha agonist, it's going to constrict. If you have an alpha blocker, because they constrict, an alpha blocker is going to dilate. And another way is you have to think epinephrine. Remember, that's a natural hormone. Of course, we give epinephrine medication, which we talked about, EpiPens and things like that. Remember, you're trying to really increase blood flow in the body and get things going. So it constricts. So this will help you hopefully understand the differences. So the other thing now, regardless of it being alpha or beta, if you do adrenergic or anti-adrenergic, that will depend what it's doing. So this is actually stimulating the receptors, regardless if it's this one or the alphas, and the anti is actually blocking the receptors, so it can do the opposite of what it does. So as I mentioned, beta blockers, and the same thing would be with the alpha blockers. If there's alpha blockers, it's trying to block those receptors so things will relax and your blood vessels will dilate. So I hope that makes sense with alpha and beta receptors. So, and remember, that works with the whole sympathetic nervous system. It's hard for me to write. I'm sorry. Oh boy, I'm going to just do that one over here. Just otherwise you can't hear me if I do. So where do parasympathetic receptors work? So parasympathetic, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to just erase this now. And we talked about beta 2, we talked about alpha, that's the sympathetic. Alpha, beta. Now parasympathetic, remember that last picture, which is on your slide set, works with muscarinic receptors. All right, muscarinic receptors. What is muscarinic receptors? Muscarinic receptors are in the brain and they are in the bladder. Those are let's just know these are the two main areas that they are working with. And muscarinic receptors help control smooth muscle. But another thing that it is binds to is acetylcholine. That's really important to remember, because acetylcholine has a lot of functions. It has to do with brain function, memory, motor function. So when we think of Parkinson's or dementia, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, these are all related to lack or decrease of acetylcholine. It's known that acetylcholine is actually decreased by 90% in those with dementia and or Alzheimer's disease. Of course, there's a lot of studying still going on, research on that, but it has a lot to do with that. But it also, your brain talks to your bladder. There's also muscarinic receptors in your bladder. So there's a lot of medicines out there called anticholinergics. Anticholinergics is actually trying to block, or actually, block acetylcholine, or actually it doesn't really block acetylcholine, but actually talks to acetylcholine to try to help this muscle work much better in the bladder. So if people that have overactive bladder, and one thing I want you to know is overactive bladder is, your bladder is a muscle. Think of your muscle just like your heart's a muscle, and it contracts and dilates. And so people with overactive bladder have issues with your bladder contracting when it shouldn't contract. And so these medications work with the muscarinic receptors, okay, and acetylcholine to try to regulate that much better, that function. So you actually won't have to run to the bathroom, gotta go right now. And anticholinergics also help regulate acetylcholine with people with Parkinson's and dementia. They've been out for a long time. That's why with anticholinergics, a main side effect is dryness. It's actually not a fun thing to deal with. So let me go to, actually I'll do that on another slide, and that is it. I'm going to be done with this one.